Bueno, nos sentimos en la...
Well, now we feel obliged to close this third seminar on pedagogical resources in human rights with some conclusions and reflections about education. Education understood as a means of combating and fighting against inequality, the inequality produced by the lack of guarantees that some people have that they can exercise certain rights, or to have mechanisms to enable us to deal with violations of rights. And to help us in this process of reflection, we have with us, but over Zoom, over the internet, here we have, there you can see her, Arantza Acha. She was here with us in person yesterday, but unfortunately today she can't be here, but she wanted to be here anyway to give us some closing remarks. She has a degree in biology from the University of the Basque Country and a master's degree in conservation and rural development from the University of Kent in the United Kingdom. She's worked for the past 7 years with the Environmental Sciences Unit of the UNESCO Office in Indonesia, in East Timor, the Philippines and Vietnam. And then since 2014, she has been the director of UNESCO Etxea, the UNESCO Center in the Basque Country. And as I said before, she has been the director of UNESCO Etxea since 2014, which is the UNESCO Center in the Basque Country, and an association that is committed to the principles of the United Nations and UNESCO, and works to help Basque society assume and internalize the values of human rights as part of the global challenge which involves the sustainable development of different people. So Arantza, the floor is all yours. Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Maitane. I do apologize for not being able to be with you all this afternoon. It's a real shame. I've got a virus. I don't know if it's this virus that everybody's talking about or if it's a different virus. I certainly hope so. But anyway, until I get the results of my tests back, I'm just going to self-isolate. I hope that my voice holds out. I have a bit of a hoarse voice, but I have been listening to you all day long, and it's a pleasure to be here, even if it's through a screen. It's a pleasure to be here in this sort of the final afternoon of this wonderful conference, wonderful seminar, and in which we want to just give you a brief outline of the role that the education for human rights can and should play in all of this. So we're going to be looking at this from a local level and an international level, and I'm just going to give you a brief outline of the global framework in which, or from which, we are aiming to make sure that human rights play a key and transformative role in educational processes throughout the world. So we adopt this approach, and we do that in Eskura, the Eskura Center. As you know, Eskura is a project, it's a center, which was set up 3 years ago by the Basque government, the Gipuzkoa Provincial Council and the San Sebastian City Council, with the aim of promoting a Basque society which has a greater commitment to human rights and that has a greater critical capacity to cope and to respond to human rights violations. And in order to do that, we would like to offer educational alternatives, pedagogical alternatives, participatory alternatives based on peace and peaceful coexistence in the current context. This seminar is an example of this, of a learning space, a space for sharing and co-creating. If we have a look at education for human rights, in general, I like to broaden our gaze a little bit when I do that, because often those who don't work in education on a daily basis might tend to understand that education just happens at school. But education doesn't just happen at school, especially education for human rights includes a wide range of different activities that have to do with training and information and dissemination, and it contributes to actually establishing a universal culture of human rights. So we are talking about what happens at schools. Of course we are. We've talked about some of the resources for school children, but also it involves what happens outside the classroom of people of all ages and in all walks of life. The aim of educating for human rights, the objectives are very broad-ranging. First of all, the aim is to understand and accept what human rights are, what they consist of, what's recognized as a human right and what isn't, so that we can be aware at an individual level of what our obligations are, what our rights are. So not just rights, but our obligations as well with regard. So it's important to understand not just our rights, but the rights of other people, and there are obligations. In the UN, member states have the largest responsibility to recognize human rights. But when we're talking about the culture of human rights and the culture of peace, this has to do with citizens. And as such, everyone, all of us, have a capacity to reclaim our rights, to demand our rights, and also to work to protect the rights of other people, those who we can see and those who are further afield.
So we need to know our rights, and that will help us develop ourselves as responsible individuals to come up with inclusive and peaceful societies. This is reflected in the promotion of tolerance, non-discrimination, and equality. And I'm just talking about the UN articles concerning education for human rights. So promoting tolerance and promoting non-discrimination and equality is based on the prevention and accusation whenever human rights violations occur. And especially about this, when it comes to citizens, we need to eradicate all types of discrimination, racism, stereotypes, hate speech, and prejudice that very often are the first step towards escalating to more serious violations of human rights. So if we were to summarize what it means to work with human rights in mind, this is about making an exercise and thinking what are the most vulnerable groups of people. At UNESCO Etxea, we want to promote a situation where people are not vulnerable. When we say that someone or a group of people is vulnerable, we're talking about their age, their origin, their race, their religion, their ethnic origins, etc. But whenever we use the term vulnerable, it would seem that it is unavoidable when we speak about vulnerable or exposed groups. It means that there is a discrimination against that group, right? So if we think at an international level, back in 2004, the General Assembly of the UN proclaimed the Global Program of Education for Human Rights, and this program was led by the High Commissioner of the UN for Human Rights, and it's aimed at promoting an action at a state level and at stakeholders level to implement education for human rights in all fields, sectors, cities and spaces. Well, this is a program that has different working stages. The first stage was from 2005 to 2010 and concentrated on education for human rights in primary and secondary education by means of recommendations, best practices, some guidelines to incorporate human rights in public policies and educational curriculum. The second stage concentrated in from 2010 to 2014. It focused on higher education and training of trainers, because this is something that's already been mentioned in this seminar, which is that in many cases the teachers don't have the necessary knowledge and resources in order to take human rights to the educational processes that occur in the classroom. That's a situation that happens all over the world, and this is why the UN concentrated on training trainers at that stage. Over the third stage, it focused more on media practitioners. We have Maidena as moderator here, and I believe she's a very clear example of how communicators can and even have to incorporate that vision of vulnerable groups and human rights when it comes to communicating and telling the news. So you can tell the news from that perspective and from the fact that something can have an impact on different groups. We are now at the fourth stage, and it's not by chance that the UN focuses now on the youth, understanding the youth as people that are 15 to 20 years of age. So the UN works on that age range. In our experience, we see that there is an insufficient but even more and more consistent recognition of the fact that young people have to participate in the processes that affect the decisions that will have an impact on their lives. At all levels, public policies, educational processes, etc. And this is when, at this stage between 2020-2024, we're concentrating on the youth. This is interesting from the perspective of mobilizing young people to struggle against climate change. And there's a challenge here, which would be that mobilizing and asking for action against climate change on the basis of human rights and on the impact that climate crisis has on human rights. Right, in this program, the UN suggests that we can work on different aspects that I believe could be interesting and relevant. So the idea is that we have public policies, laws, educational curriculum, educational laws incorporate human rights and also enable us to recognize the reality and perspective of the young people in their educational processes. So we need to take the concept of discrimination, non-discrimination, tolerance to the educational processes on the different subjects is important. And we've already said this, it shouldn't be present in collateral activities, but all they should be included in the curriculum. We should pay special attention on the fact that situations of exclusion and vulnerability affect young people as well. So part of this work is related to identifying best practices, and in this sense we at Eskura will be very careful when it comes to identifying best practices and bring them to the Basque Country, to our reality, and maybe we'll be able to take a qualitative leap when it comes to being more present and having a greater impact on education in terms of human rights. The UN recognizes that also education occurs in non-formal spaces, and this is why it issued some recommendations when it comes to collaborating with the civil society, especially with youth associations, how to provide resources, spaces, skills, and participation of the groups of young people in non-formal education spaces in order to promote human rights. And the UN also recognizes young people that contribute to education for human rights. So there are other elements issued by the UN. We should work on more consistent policies. For instance, this is one of the main challenges in terms of human rights and in Agenda 2030. And the interconnection between both. Whenever we establish educational programs, this is not just carried out in the field of education. And this morning we heard from Inguru Gelas, which is a very interesting experience in terms of consistency. The environment and the education ministries work jointly in this project. So that's what we need, actually. We need different departments to work on social policies. We also need to work on promotion of diversity, people working on the promotion of peace, etc., etc. And obviously, we also have here departments related to the promotion of gender equality and the eradication of gender-based violence against women. So at Eskura, over the past 3 years, we've been working very hard. Eskura has been participating since 2018 on all these issues. And we want to take all these recommendations issued by the UN, by the Global Program of Education for Human Rights. We want to take this to our reality, and we want to tell you about it so that you can be users of Eskura. Eskura wants to give you the necessary tools. Those of you who are participating in this seminar, you are highly sensitive. You want to promote human rights in educational processes. So we believe it's very important for you to know what we do so that you can also enjoy what we've developed and use it, of course. One of the things we do is that we collect teaching resources, material, best practices in education, social pedagogy, and citizen participation concerning human rights. That's one of the main tasks, and we have a media library that's been created that can be used. You can ask for material. It is located in the Ayete Palace in Donostia, and there's also material available online. So the idea here is to provide access to all this material that can be very useful to you as educators or civil society representatives, or maybe members of the academia or the public sector. We want you to be able to use these tools so that you can educate for human rights. We also create teaching resources to a lesser extent, because we've concentrated very much in collecting the existing experiences and materials. We also create specific resources, and you've been left on your chairs a copy of this manual that we drafted last year with Paloma Viejo. It's a guide for you to understand hate speech. This is one of the good examples of a material we've developed. I encourage you to read it. I believe it's fascinating. We've talked about this often, and yeah, you mentioned it, hate speech, racist demonstrations, homophobic demonstrations are increasing a lot, and maybe thanks to this book we'll be able to understand some of the keys that explain this. We also work on the dissemination of our resources over the social media. We also have newsletters that you can subscribe to, and we also organize yearly events. One was a fair on teaching resources that was held in spring, and the second would be this seminar that we want to disseminate knowledge. We want you to participate. I believe that yesterday and today you've remarked that there are very different viewpoints. I think that they're all complementary among each other. And there's also a broad space left in order to bring the different approaches together and closer together. People working on social justice, ecofeminism, eco-pacifism, protection of the environment, etc., can have a common space like this seminar to exchange and to identify elements that will help you co-create. This year, Eskura concentrated its work on education concerning the interaction between the environment and human rights, because we understand that although this discussion about climate change is a discussion that is taking up a great deal of space internationally, nationally also, at all levels, climate crisis. Of course, there may be some people that refuse its existence, but it's more and more broadly recognized every day. And sometimes this discussion is very technical, very scientific. Of course, this is very necessary, but we tend to forget about people. And this is why Eskura has made a great effort this year to identify the existing material, knowledge, and experts that can help us, that can contribute to raising awareness concerning interaction between human rights and the environment. We've detected that there's still a long way to go ahead of us. There's still this need to bring discourses together, closer together, but many things have been done so far. And of course, we've made headway, but we need specific resources to work in the classroom. Anyhow, we understand that this is a very necessary and urgent reflection that needs to be done. Yesterday, David Boyd, the rapporteur, told us that tomorrow the UN Council, for the first time, is going to vote on the possible recognition of the right to a clean and healthy environment. We will follow that discussion very closely. We know there are reluctant people there because recognition of human rights means many commitments that maybe not all the international community is ready to go for, but there's more and more support every day to this recognition. At UNESCO Etxea and at Eskura, we're very happy to have had you here in this seminar. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you for sharing all this knowledge that you have. I would also like to thank the speakers, of course. For those of you that will look at the videos that will be edited and made available online, for those of you who couldn't come here and follow this seminar online, well, I hope you like them. I would like to thank all the Eskura team, Zaira, Agatha, and Juanra. Thank you very much for your work. You've made a great effort. I would also like to thank all the technicians at the Cursal Palace, and I would like to thank the interpreters. It's been a pleasure to have you all here. We've shared a huge amount of ideas, reflections, and of course, we want to take all this and put all this into motion and translate all this into action. Thank you. And Maitena, of course, thanks to you. I cannot forget you. Thank you very much, Arantza. Are there any questions from the floor, maybe?
Les has dejado noquear.
They're knocked out, literally. Oh, they must be exhausted. I know. Well, I believe these 2 days have been very intense. There have been so many relevant, interesting contributions, and I'm not saying this because I'm chairing or moderating this session. Can we expect more? We've had so many participants in this seminar. Do you think we finally understand that this is something that we all need to do together? Well, I don't know. I don't know if all citizens are going to attend to the next seminar, but quite recently, I was talking to someone in a different space where we were talking about climate change and human rights. These two elements seem to be completely far away from each other. I think that now, for instance, we have a group of people in La Cañada Real, a vulnerable group of people that were deprived from their rights, right to food, right to a decent housing, and their situation has changed. So I believe that if we've been able to achieve that, maybe we'll be able to explain how this reality is actually a violation of our human rights. I believe that we need to take that leap. We need to reach out to citizens in a more normal, ordinary type of language. I think that's what we need. I totally agree with you. Maybe we have the theory, but sometimes we are far away from other type of audiences that may need a simpler type of language, because all these can be told in many, many different ways. Aran, thank you. Thank you so much for the effort you've made to be here with us. And well, I hope we'll be seeing you very, very soon. A warm round of applause to you. Thank you.